समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
While everyone in India has been talking about the upcoming elections in Bangladesh, there's a second country preparing to hold elections in December on our eastern border. Myanmar will be using Indian-made EVMs, though most experts are predicting that the machines will lead to victory for parties backed by the military junta. Even worse for New Delhi, the junta and the rebel factions fighting against it have become increasingly dependent on China. All this could squeeze the space India has in Myanmar and give northeast insurgent groups a safe haven across the border. India needs to quickly start acting or risk another strategic defeat in its near neighborhood. Even the ghosts had begun to rebel in those months of horror, it was said. Tossed into the cemetery in Tamwe, a northeastern suburb of Yangon, denied a dignified cremation and Buddhist last rites, the souls of young pro-democracy protesters massacred by the army were said to roam around the area, demonstrating whenever bodies of junta supporters were brought in. For a time, the ghosts ruled the graveyard, together with the people who had overthrown the one-party state of the Burma Socialist Program Party. Then the army unleashed a second round of massacres, annihilating the protesters as well as the ghosts. This month, the military junta ruling Myanmar began preparations for fresh elections that are to be held by December. By ending a long-running state of emergency and shipping in Indian-manufactured EVMs. Little imagination is needed, though, to know what kind of government those voting machines will eventually produce. The National League for Democracy and its leader Aung San Suu Kyi, whose landslide win in 2020 led to the coup the next year, has been barred from contesting. And a new proportional representation system has been implemented to ensure no one party can command a clear majority. For India, the elections pose a very complex challenge. The collapse of the junta's authority in the face of an increasingly successful campaign by ethnic rebels has left space for insurgents from India's northeast to expand their presence and infrastructure. For its part, China is exercising its deep influence with insurgents in the north of the country to ensure it has a chokehold over the new government, whatever shape it finally takes. To retain its influence in Myanmar, India will have to maintain ties with both the new regime, the military, and the ethnic insurgents who hold territory along our borders. And all of this is no small ask. For decades now, Indian policy on Myanmar has continued to be haunted by those ghosts of the democratic uprising of 1988. Following the massacres, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's government threw its weight behind Aung San Suu Kyi and the pro-democracy movement. Elections in 1990 saw the NLD party register a sweeping victory, but the generals simply refused to recognize the results and continued to hold on to power. The military scholar Donald Seekins noted that the army entrenched itself by making deals with ethnic warlords and various criminal cartels often linked to the drug and gems trade. The military consolidation was to have serious consequences for India. The regime of General Than Shwe, who took power in 1992, allowed ethnic Meitei insurgent groups from Manipur to embed themselves across the border. In the town of Tamu, factions of the National Socialist Council of Nagalim, as it calls itself, also found refuge in Sagaing, the province just across the border, together with elements of the United Liberation Front of Assam. From soon after it took power in 1991, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's government sought to rebuild ties with the generals, recognizing it had to work with them. The results, however, were slow to come. In April-May 1995, the Indian Army launched operations against some 200 insurgents, mainly from Ulfa, the People's Liberation Army of Manipur, and the All Tripura Tiger Force, an Adivasi insurgent group. Things had improved enough by then in the India-Myanmar ties. Rumel Dahiya has recorded in his first-person account of those operations for the Myanmar army to initially use force against the insurgent convoy on some occasions. 4 times, though, he writes, Indian troops poised to cross the border were forced back by their counterparts. Then came the big twist. The grant of an award to Aung San Suu Kyi ended what little cooperation there was. To make things worse, Dahiya records, Indian troops were very ill prepared for jungle warfare in that region and suffered from terrible cases of cerebral malaria. Efforts to restore ties with the junta continued after the operations, with India handing over gun runners linked to insurgent organizations with ties to its own military. The Myanmar military reciprocated by tamping down operations by northeast insurgent groups. Although their operations never really ended, Indian forces were reported to have used drones to target camps run by the United Liberation Front of Assam and the People's Liberation Army in the Naga self-administered zone of the Sagaing province. Even more consequential than insurgent bases, though, is the influence that China will exercise over the new government in Yangon. Ethnic armies closely linked to China, key among them the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army in the Kokang region, which is largely ethnic Chinese, controls large swathes of territory in northern Shan state. Together with the Taang National Liberation Army, the Kachin Independence Organization, and the Shan State Progress Party, insurgents control all but a small part of the critical trade highway from Mandalay through Lashio and onto Muse in China. This is the lifeline of the regime. From the 2021 coup on, China had made its displeasure known to the generals, seeing their course of action as destabilizing and a threat to its investments and interests in Myanmar. Thus, Beijing made the decision not to block the first ever United Nations Security Council resolution on the situation in Myanmar, which passed in December 2023. General Min Aung Hlaing, the junta chief, was not invited to Beijing to discuss these issues. The Chinese irritation with General Min's regime soon grew as the government became enmeshed with cyber scam operations on China borders. Thus, in 2023, the People's Liberation Army decided to teach the Myanmar generals a lesson and unleashed the so-called Three Brothers Alliance of insurgent groups against the government. The region's largest town and economic hub, Lashio, fell to the alliance last year. Fearing rapid collapse of the regime rather than its real objective of weakened client state, Beijing now stepped in to cool down temperatures. Lashio was returned to government control, but only in return for ceding the insurgent Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army a firm grip of surrounding territories in northern Shan. Led by Special Envoy for Myanmar Deng Shihun, China is now in the process of negotiating similar deals with other insurgent groups perched on the Mandalay-Lashio Muse highway, where each insurgent group is extracting tolls of their own. The eventual Chinese objective is to resume work on the expansive China-Myanmar Economic corridor project, which appears to eventually connect southwestern China to the Indian Ocean via a network of roads and high-speed railways. That will need to pass through the central dry zone of the country as well as war-torn Arakan. So a good deal of deal-making still lies ahead. And it's there where India has an opportunity to interject itself. The worst case scenario looming for India is that it finds itself left without any influence among both the generals as well as the proxy parties that will prop up the regime after the elections, and of course, the insurgents perched along India's borders. Even though China, unlike Pakistan, has so far seen no strategic interest in sustaining a significant insurgency targeting India's northeast, that could change. Chinese intelligence officers have visited camps at Taga across the border in Myanmar, and the country has urged all groups in the northeast to unite. Journalist Rajiv Bhattacharya has revealed. As Athena On Now argues, China now seeks to create a new order held up by three pillars: ethnic insurgents, civil society, and the military, but all held in check by dependence on Beijing. The Chinese government is also committing growing levels of military force to protect its interests, using private military contractors drawn from its army who guard its economic investments. Where does all this leave India? At first glimpse, the country has very few cards to play. The long-delayed Kaladan transport project meant to hurry connectivity between the northeast and the port of Sitwe in Arakan is scheduled to be completed by the end of 2027, Union Minister of Ports Sarabanda Sonowal recently announced. Almost all of Rakhine province is militarily contested, with the Arakan Army insurgent group holding the entire province bar the towns of Sitwe, Kyaukphu and Maunong. The prospects for the project, therefore, are at best uncertain, unless India can open a conversation with the Arakan army. There are things, though, that India can and ought be doing to establish its presence while these negotiations continue. Famine has become a depressing feature of life in Rakhine, with local people unable to purchase abundant stocks of fish and grain because of an ongoing military blockade. Local residents are even reported to have been forced into sex work, serving the men of the beleaguered army garrison in Sitwe. French, Swiss, and even Turkish NGOs are supporting communities in the region. But India is strangely invisible. India also needs to deepen its relationship with the Arakan army. Experts like Tin Shin Aung have been arguing. Mizoram politicians have met with the group, but the government of India needs to assert itself more in the debates over Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The Arakan army supports the rehabilitation of the Rohingya in Bangladesh, but not their return to their homeland, a cause of bitter division between the insurgents and Bangladesh. Another tightrope act that has to be walked. For decades now, India's policy on Myanmar has been to deal with its generals and maintain a distance from the country's exceedingly muddy insurgent groups and political struggles. That policy, though, could now lead New Delhi to being dealt out of the game altogether. Delhi can't afford another defeat in the region, which will have long, profound consequences and bring China through proxy onto another long swathe of India's borders. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.